Hello, dear friends and adventurers. It's Rob, the D&D wannabe, here with some exciting news. This podcast is now made possible in partnership with our good friends at Misty Mountain Gaming. Veteran-owned and operated, Misty Mountain is one of the largest dice companies in the world. They offer the widest selection of metal, gemstone, and glass dice combined. For yourself, that special role player in your life, or your favorite podcast hosts. Just saying. Look for their booth at your next local comic, anime, or gaming convention, or find their products at mistymountaingaming.com. Okay, on with the show. Alright guys, let's bring it in. Today, we're going to introduce Roger and Scott's new characters after the tragic rock falling incident last session. Let's get started. So, you're all in the tap room of the pub, and you notice a cloaked and hooded figure at the back of the room, sitting at a table alone. Alright then. Rakthor will approach him. Ho there, friend! I'll buy an ale to hear your tale.
The brooding figure is dressed all in black. He turns to Rakthor and pulls back his hood, revealing his long white hair and a sexy scar down one side of his face. He responds, "I am not your friend, but I shall drink your beer. They call me Lord Bloodedge Ravensblade, but as long as you keep the booze coming, you can call me Lord Edge."
Well, all right, Lord Edge. Tell me a little about yourself.
I am a half-elf rogue noble who doesn't fit in, with a troubled past, here to take out my unresolved issues on goblin jugulars.
Goblin jugglers? Sorry. Troubled past, you say? What happened?
When I was young, my parents were both killed in front of me.
Oh, man, I am so sorry to hear that. Were you close?
I'm sorry, what?
Your parents. Were you close with your parents?
I honestly don't think anyone's ever asked me that before. Usually when I say, my parents were both killed in front of me, people just kind of awkwardly move along and leave it at that.
That is mighty inconsiderate. Familial bonds are very significant ties. I'm sure that losing them was very tough on you and your family. How did your siblings take it?
Siblings?
Yeah, siblings. Like your brothers, maybe sisters. Do you have any siblings?
Sure, of course I do.
Oh, yeah. Are they older, younger, maybe?
Younger?
So of course, you had to step up and support the family after your parents passed. That forced you to grow up fast, I bet.
I guess.
Or perhaps you had close friends or nearby relatives who took you in?
Probably. Sure.
And your siblings, let's not forget about them. Where are they now?
Well...
Are you adventuring to try and support them? Or are you fleeing your responsibilities by being here?
I would never.
Or was adventuring like the family business? What did your parents do before their untimely deaths?
Well, you see,
Were you, like, wealthy, wanting, comfortable, somewhere in between? Like, where did you come from? Where did you go, you know?
Is that a song?
Like, who is the real Lord Bloodedge Ravensblade?
Oh, okay, enough! Come on, dude! What's with all the questions? I just want to play my character! You know, Lord Bloodedge!
Hey, sorry, man. Rakthor is just curious, and he's trying to get to know Edge. Lord Edge. And these are pretty basic questions about Edge's backstory. It's okay, guys. It sounds like Roger maybe has some work to do fleshing Edge out.
Lord Edge!
Lord Edge, sorry.
Lord Edge! Lord Edge! Lord Edge!
Roger, okay? Let's just keep things moving. Your conversation is interrupted as the tavern doors swing open, and standing in the doorway is Scott's character.
That's right, guys. A cloaked and hooded figure dressed all in black is silhouetted against the storm outside as he bursts through the tavern doors. He throws back his hood and proclaims to the inhabitants inside, "Greetings, lowlifes. I am Dante Murderblack, an orphaned half-elf rogue noble who doesn't play by the rules. I've come here to slit throats and drink ale, so you'd better have plenty of ale. Bro, seriously?
This guy sounds like your guy.
Oh, man, Scott, we have got to start comparing notes before the session. Ugh!
Welcome back, friends and adventurers, to another episode of Bardic Twinspiration, hosted, as always, without any sense of variety to break up the monotony, by myself, the D&D wannabe, Rob, the older twin, and the younger twin, who shall remain nameless.
That's right, I am back, as always, here ready to fill in the awkward silence gaps that would otherwise have Rob just talking to himself.
So, brother, I don't know if you knew this about me, but I was born at a very young age.
I did know that you were born, and I did know that it was one of the first things that you did in life.
And there were other people there.
Mm-hmm. I know, I was there.
That's right, you were. And since that point, I have done things.
Debatable. Go on.
And they have led me to this point in my life, talking about this with you. My origin story, my backstory, as it were.
Filled with so much regret. If they led you to here tonight, sitting and talking to me as your primary source of entertainment, nay, your job, you poor, poor, sad little man.
Adventurers in Dungeons & Dragons had lives before they were adventurers in Dungeons & Dragons. The events that lead up to the events of your campaign are a character's backstory, and they should inform the decisions and the actions and the relationships that character takes with them into the sessions of the game.
I know that a lot of people really look forward to the character creation process. Some people do it as its own pursuit. I have a couple of friends on our Discord who I've played with in a summer game during the pandemic who just make a character a day. Like, that is how they have their fun. And I respect that, and I wish I was that way, but I typically take a lot longer to do so.
You take a lot longer to do so. Record-setting amounts of time to do so.
And one of the big reasons for that is because I like to take a very long time on the backstory and make it as unique as possible and really tie it in to the setting that the Dungeon Master has elected to run their campaign in.
Sure, the ability scores, the skills, that's the easy part. What equipment that a character is carrying, all that can be decided in minutes, as far as I'm concerned.
I still take a long time doing that, too. I like to play with every number before the character is complete. But, to your point, it doesn't take me nearly as long as the limitless amount of options that one has when making their backstory.
Right. When I'm thinking about equipment-wise, what I'm going to wear for the day, that takes very little time whatsoever. And in most days doesn't frankly matter. But as to who I am and what led me to that decision, that's significant. And for the player characters, the backstory probably should be informing a lot of these things. It should inform what skill proficiencies you have selected. It should inform what class you are.
It's probably going to impact whether or not that set of clothes that you're putting on is a set of common clothes, traveler's clothes, or fine garments.
At bare minimum.
Are you really going to walk down the street wearing that?
We're both wearing the same outfit. One of us has to go home and change. I'm wearing traveler's clothes. You're wearing traveler's clothes.
Because in the life of adventurer, every outfit you wear might be the outfit that you're caught dead in.
I think D&D characters are kind of cartoon characters in that they're always caught in the exact same outfit, and they have multiple sets of the exact same outfit. Until you get to the shopping episode.
Oh, mine aren't. I've already had 3 wardrobe changes. I've had one for every city I've been in.
Well, all of that to say, backstories are worth talking about. So that's what we're here to do.
Right. We just came off of an episode where we were discussing goals for Session 0, and one of the major ones was to leave with character concepts in mind. So this episode is going to be fun in its own right, but it's also kind of a follow-up to say, at minimum, what should people be walking out of Session 0 with? A great fleshed out backstory with some story hooks and a completed character sheet would be ideal. Ideally, you will at least leave the Session 0 with an idea of who they are, what they've been through, and where they're going.
So, let's talk about it. Steve, you and I have both played a lot of Dungeons & Dragons, but if there's one thing that you have done more than me, it's play Dungeons & Dragons.
This is true.
I'm usually the guy behind the screen coming up with NPCs and villains. You have a little more experience than me in creating backstories for characters that you've actually played.
Right. Well, that's because I don't have to come up with campaign settings or plots or anything like that. I just sit there and make characters until basically the end of Session 2. Because throughout the course of Session 1, I'm still tweaking.
Sure, my job is much harder and much more important, but let's focus on you tonight. How do you...
Hey.
We've already talked a little bit about all of the time and care that you put into carefully constructing your backstories for your characters. And the characters that you have played have been some of the most entertaining, complex, and realistic characters, or realistically portrayed characters, in campaigns that I have run. So, when you go to start creating a new character for a new story, where do you begin?
Well, I'm not sure where most people would start, because I haven't actually asked that question very much, but my approach has always been the same. And the first thing that I do when creating a character for a new campaign is ask the DM about the campaign. I tend to make my characters incredibly campaign specific. So the more I know about the setting that it's going to take place in, then the better I can integrate my character into it, because that is my priority, is to tie my character's backstory and their goals into something that is specific to the setting.
What sorts of questions do you ask?
All the questions. I want to know about the different countries that exist within the campaign setting. I want to know about their systems of government. I want to know if there are any conflicts between those countries that are going on or that have taken place in the recent past. I want to know about any major factions or any heroes or villains that are commonly known throughout the land. I'm fishing for something that is particularly interesting to me, or even better yet, particularly interesting to the DM about this setting. Because then if I make that a critical part of my character's backstory, then I know that the DM will jump at the chance to explore that, and that my character's story will be central to the campaign.
So, there's kind of a philosophy in Dungeons & Dragons that says that the story should focus on the characters, the heroes of the story. You're kind of putting that in reverse and trying to attach yourself to elements that the Dungeon Master is already planning to incorporate into the tale to make yourself more significant.
Yeah, in a way. I mean, it's all about me.
Maybe significant is the wrong word. More involved. Is involved a better word?
Involved is good. I'm looking for something that the DM wants to talk about, because if I make that a part of my character's story, then the DM's going to talk a lot about it, and my character will then be intrinsically involved in that aspect. You know, maybe it's something that was already going to be crucial to the campaign, in which case, great, no extra work for the DM, lots of involvement for Steve. Or maybe it's something that the DM was going to sideline for this campaign because, I can't think of how to tie it in, and I'm giving them an opportunity to do that. It does come from maybe a subconscious, or at least until now subconscious, fear of making this awesome backstory with lots of story hooks that is just never utilized by the Dungeon Master. So I find something in their world that they want to talk about and give them an opportunity to do that while pulling my character's story arc to front and center stage. For instance, in the first campaign that you ran for me, when we were having our Session 0, you made an offhand comment about there is something going on with the Flying Isles. They are no longer the Flying Isles, they are now the Burning Isles, and something big is going down there, but you don't know about that unless you play a Dragonborn. because they're the ones that live there. And news hasn't reached the mainland yet. So by God, I played a Dragonborn, because then I had information that no one else at the table did.
Yeah, the story for the Flying Isles / the Burning Isles / now as they are known, the Ember Isles, in my campaign setting, has been a developing and interesting story to be able to tell. And at least at that stage, it was a pretty big secret. And Gore's story wound up being the story that the campaign followed.
Yes, my evil plan came together exactly as intended.
At the point that we regrettably had to end that campaign, we were on the way to your homeland to see for yourself, to return there after the big event.
Right. And what I perceived as sort of a gift to you is the opportunity to discuss openly what was going on with the Flying Isles, and to use me as a conduit to share this information with the other players that they would otherwise have no justifiable reason of knowing. And then conversely, the selfish part of that was I get to know stuff that no one else does, and this major event that's happening in the world is integral to my backstory.
Personally important to you.
Yes, and as it progresses, my story will continue to develop. And it will just, by nature or by design, be a very big part of the story.
So after you and the Dungeon Master have found a point of common interest, something about the setting that fascinates you that you want to latch onto and incorporate into your character's backstory, I'm guessing then that you and the Dungeon Master then go a little bit more in depth with that particular element, so that you know a little bit more about it, so that you can begin to find out where you fit into this thing, this organization, this family, this country.
Definitely. I remember the game where I made a storm cleric / sorcerer for one of your one-shots. And I mean, that one-shot only took... actually, I did extend to 2 sessions, but for those 2 sessions, I still made my character for at least an hour, and we were talking for a good 30-45 minutes of that hour about the different gods and the ones that I could be beholden to. For me, I really want to involve the DM in my character creation process, because there's a lot of information in the DM's brain that my character would know, and the more of it that I, the player, can absorb, the more realistically I can portray that character. So I am fishing for information on a country, a faction, a guild I could be involved in, a house that I could be from, or a noble line that I could be in service of. Anything that's going to kind of ground the character and give him a basis to move forward from.
As a Dungeon Master, I can really get behind that, because my job is to tell a story for you and about your characters. And I love it when I'm involved in the character creation process. Not necessarily so that I can affect the character's backstory or how they're played or the mechanics of them or anything such as that, but just so that I get to learn more about the characters. Because the more that I know, the bigger fan I am of those characters, the more I want to tell their story.
Plus, there's the fact that you could be giving me a whole bunch of information about the noble family in the town that I grew up in. And that information is very useful to me, the player, because it helps me inform decisions and make impressions, but it is not particularly useful to you as the DM. What's useful to you, the DM, is when the player receives all that information and goes, "Oh, I hate those guys." Or, "I would die for them." Knowing how they respond to this external factor, this external stimulus, is going to give you a peek into the character's psyche, so that you can know what sort of things they will receive favorably or what sort of things they will not.
And it doesn't have to stop at the Dungeon Master. This rarely happens in campaigns that I get to play in, but it's a great idea, if they're open to it, to involve the other players in your character creation process, to forge those bonds that your characters will have before session 1.
You know, the Lost Mines of Phandelver campaign that I ran for y'all, there was a good bit of this going on. As a matter of fact, we predetermined that 2 of my characters were going to be brothers. You were one of them. Mm-hmm. And then 2 of the other characters were going to be comrades in arms. And I think that if I had to do it again, I would insist upon that. Let's say I had a group of 3 to 5 players. I would insist that each person had a prior relationship with 2 of them. And I would not necessarily stipulate what kind of relationship that was, or even that it had to be a favorable one. Because 2 people who don't get along is just terribly realistic. And there's a lot of comedy in 2 people that don't get along being forced to work together.
As you're saying that, I'm imagining a party that is a love triangle. Just...
Ooh. As the good relationship or the bad relationship?
I've never played in a party like that, but I'm imagining this completely disinterested character with 2 separate members of the party, both vying for their affection and trying to constantly undermine the other. And that sounds like a great D&D sitcom to me.
It's kind of like the relationship between Pike and Grog and Scanlan, maybe? How there's a lot of unrequited love coming from Scanlan towards Pike. How Pike and Grog have this pre-existing, deep, intense platonic relationship, and how Grog and Scanlan have become best buds.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, the relationship between Pike and Scanlan isn't necessarily antagonistic, but it's not necessarily the best either.
These characters are from Critical Role Campaign 1, in case anyone is still unfamiliar with that.
At any rate, I think that I would insist upon that in the next game that I run. You need to have 2 relationships. You can decide if they're positive or negative, and you can decide who they're with. But if I say that everyone has to have 2, that gives them some options. And it means no one's getting left out.
Right.
We were running a 5-person campaign in Lost Mines of Phandelver, and 2 of you had a relationship, and 2 of you had a relationship, and 1 person was left out, and that was a mistake on my part. Ended up working out great. Everyone had a lot of fun.
Fortunately, that 1 person was the most memorable and likable member of the party, who everyone got along with.
Hunter makes some good guys.
He does.
But the relationship that you and James had between your 2 brother characters was a very positive one, but it could just as easily have been a very negative one. I mean, I know lots of brothers who don't get along very well. You and I have been brothers that don't get along very well at different points in our past.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is just terribly realistic.
So, what are some other things that you want to make sure that you include in the backstory? We have relationships with other members of the party. We have a bond to a place or an organization or people from the campaign setting. What else?
At this point in time, on all the characters that I have made previously, there is only one other thing that I wanted to make sure that I included, and that is ambiguity. And I have made this more and more of an emphasis as time went on. As I have made characters, this has become more and more relevant to that process. There needs to be something in my character's past that is kind of an X factor. It's kind of an unknown. Let's take my most recent character, for example, Salem. He knows what happened to his mother. She was killed on a diplomatic mission to Alderaan. No, it was a diplomatic mission to a different country within your campaign setting.
Which is legally distinct from Alderaan.
But as she was returning home, her party was attacked, and she was killed, and only 1 person survived to come back and tell the tale. But, based on what Salem knew about his mother, some of those things in that explanation could not have been true. Meaning that despite the fact that he has an explanation of his mother's death, he does not believe it, and he is confident that the truth is out there somewhere for him to find. Other characters of mine have had gaps in their memory where they could not account for a certain period of time, but they know something significant happened. And one of my characters was a reborn. It's one of the new lineage options. Was it from Tasha's, or was it from a different class book, source book?
That's Tasha's.
Okay. Yet another reason to go buy Tasha's. One of my characters was a reborn and didn't realize that they were a reborn. That the resurrection that brought them back was imperfect. So that's a story seed in and of itself. There is something about your backstory that you as a player have yet to discover. I think that is very important because it is so much fun to try and suss out or to try to investigate throughout the course of the campaign. Really gives you something to look forward to.
I think that is a really important element of a backstory is that you have something to do, like some reason to quest, to adventure, an unanswered question that needs answering, a missing item that needs recovering, a unrequited love that needs requiting, something to that effect.
Thanks to you, Salem actually had another one. Salem had a brother that was on that mission with his mother that was also gone and presumed dead, until in session 1, I caught wind of him. Turns out that he's still alive, and he's wandering the countryside as a vagrant. He did not come home for some reason, and so Salem left to go find him. And in session 1 I did, and it revealed that he actually thought the rest of the family was dead and had been fed a similar story about our demise. Big plot hooks, big intrigue. Who knows what's going on? Makes me question everything that I knew, everything that I had been told by these people.
Who do I trust? What do I believe?
Yeah, and I think that stuff is exciting.
Me too. That's why I put it in there.
So it's kind of a gift for you as the player because it gives you something to investigate and look forward to, but it's also a great story seed for the DM. So it's a kind of a gift that keeps on giving. A lot of Critical Role Campaign 2 was actually built by Matthew Mercer to fill in some gaps that were left by Taliesin when he made his character. As kind of a gift to Matt, he said, yeah, and I don't remember what happened before a couple of months ago. You fill in those blanks as you see fit. And Matt took that and made 2/3 of the campaign. And he referenced that as a gift from Taliesin.
I'll kind of back him up on that. I love it when the player characters hand me an empty box. And it doesn't have to be their whole backstory. That was pretty extreme on Taliesin's part. He's a madman in that way. But having something...
He's a madman in a lot of ways.
Having something of mine in a character's backstory gives me something to surprise them with. And I delight in surprising my players and their characters with things they didn't know about themselves.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's gold. That has a lot of role-playing potential, and it's just narrative gold.
Now, we've kind of been doing this free-form thing so far, kind of talking about different elements of the backstory that you want to make sure to include or that might be exciting to include, but there are some pretty stringent processes that can be followed to ensure that you're going to create a memorable and effective backstory for your next character.
That's true. When I made my first character, I did it largely on my own. I went to the DM and said, I want a character who has this stuff going on in their backstory and this stuff going on in their future, and he made that work. When I made Gore, I changed my approach a little bit and said, you tell me what's going on in the world and I'll tell you how I'm involved in it. But when I made Salem, one of my most recent characters, we followed a different process entirely. I actually used a system that you developed to help new players or experienced players like myself who were looking for a little bit more direction make a character that was not only grounded in the setting, but particularly grounded in quote-unquote reality.
Yeah, this system that I've been working on since the very first session that I ran in Dungeons & Dragons is something that I've been creating and developing to tie players into the setting and to get them thinking critically and holistically about their characters as a person. Because adventurers are people too, and probably people first. And it's easy for that to get lost in the exciting life of monster slaying.
Yeah, I feel like your goal was to help the characters make someone who was very deeply real and grounded and believable. Where in a fantastic setting, it's really easy to focus on,
the fantasy.
Yeah, upon the fantastic aspects of your character, where the mundane aspects of your character are no less important and often much more prevalent in their life prior to being an adventurer, in their life before the campaign begins.
I'll be honest, actually, one of the reasons that I spent so much time developing this was so people would be obliged to create original characters for my campaigns. Because I was getting a little tired of people trying to make superheroes and trying to make anime characters and bring them into my campaign settings, and to stop them bringing characters deeply tied to other stories and other campaign settings and trying to shoehorn them into mine. This process made them start over, start with a clean slate, and approach things with a new perspective.
What, you didn't like it when your characters made Batman, Iron Man, and Naruto?
I did not like it when the Naruto one. The Naruto one actually hits a little close to home because I did have a wannabe Goku in one of my campaigns. I had a Alucard from Helsing in one of my campaigns, and yeah, I just didn't care for it.
I know I played alongside a Batman analog, and I have an as yet unused Iron Man analog Artificer. So tell us a little bit more about it. What is this thing, and what does it entail?
This process, and that's really what it is a process, I have dubbed the Machine.
Sexy name.
The Machine is really just a series of fairly open-ended questions meant to be asked by the Dungeon Master to the player with both participants present to guide the player towards a holistic origin story. And it starts not with the character, but with their parents, with their heritage. When thinking about the life that a character has lived and how they've developed, it's really important to think about who is raising them and the reputation and lives of the people controlling those lives. You as a parent, I'm sure, feel that you have a lot to do with the development of your 3 children.
For better or worse, that is true.
And the same is true for a player character. Their parents passed on everything that they knew and everything that they thought about the world and everything that they hoped for their children. Whether or not it was picked up by them, it is sure to have had an effect. And the Machine is all about nurture. Is all about nurture over nature. It's about the effect that your environment has had on you. So whether it's your actual parents, an uncle or grandparents, or a legal guardian, who were they? What did they do? And how did that affect you?
I remember that you have this prevailing theory about life in general, which you have extended to RPGs, that we are all impacted by our parents. We are always going to grow up to be either a reflection of them or a shadow of them. Like, you will either try to grow up to be them, or you will try to grow up to be anything but them.
That is a gross oversimplification, but yes, in a way, I think that one of the defining aspects of who you are is who you spent the most time with during those formative years.
And as many times as psychologists ask how we feel about our mothers, I dare say that's probably true.
And taking that just a little bit further, after your heritage, the Machine asks you about your family and who was around you during that time, whether it's by the bonds of blood or the bonds of friendship. Who spent those formative years with you? Who did you allow to influence you? Do you have siblings? And if so, how do you feel about them? Were you raised around cousins, or were you raised on the streets with a band of urchins? Were you close to your parents or grandparents? Or did you have a big family or a small family? Or were you an only child? These kind of things affect us. I mean, our lives have been pretty drastically affected by the fact that we've been twins this entire time. We've known each other exactly our whole lives.
You know, I thought that this was a fun part of Salem's backstory because I didn't really think too much prior to this about the families from my previous characters. I think I just said that they were all only children, just because it meant that I didn't have to think more about it. But with Salem, when you asked me that question, we decided I was raised by my father because my mother's gone. Why is my mother gone? Let's leave that up to the DM. How is my mother gone? Let's leave that up to the DM. How many siblings do you have? 2, but one of them's gone too. How did you feel about that sibling? I really looked up to that sibling, but now they're gone. Do you have any others? Yes, I have a younger sibling, and I try to give them everything that my older brother once gave me.
Yeah, you were a middle child who all of a sudden had to be the oldest child and even a father figure because of how tough your mom's death or disappearance was on your old man. And thinking about stuff like that, the kind of toll that would take, that amount of responsibility on a young man, is important.
Yeah.
It's one of the more significant things about your character to me.
And this is not something that I would have contemplated without you asking me those questions, so the system works to your credit. And then from there, we decided that, well, because of my additional responsibility around the home, I probably didn't get out much or have a whole lot of friends. So we decided that Salem was growing up as kind of a homeschooled kid who was introverted and very excited to now be out and exploring the world, but didn't necessarily have all of his social norms down, so he didn't necessarily know how to act with other people. He was a little awkward and a little bit overzealous, a little bit oversharing.
See, that's the thing that I like about the machine, is that answering one set of questions naturally leads you into the next. The next part of the machine is the environment that your character spent their developmental years in. Because you had responsibilities around the home, you decided that your character, Salem, pretty much lived his entire life up to his adventuring days in a small little frontier town. And he didn't get out and see the broader world, and everything that he knows from the world is from books, and he hasn't met a bunch of the different types of people that inhabit the world. You haven't seen your first dragonborn until session 1. The environment that you grow up in, whether it be a palace or a gutter or a secluded mountain temple or a seaport or on the high seas themselves or on the road as a gypsy, those are all entirely different upbringings that will turn out entirely different types of people.
Right, and I remember you were really probing me for info on this town. It's like, okay, so what country are you from? Oh, I don't know, this one. So he said, okay, so are you from a city or a town? I don't know, a small town. Let's make it like an outpost or something. Okay, what kind of outpost? Is it a military outpost? Or no, it's a trading outpost. So we decided that most of Salem's stories about the wide world are coming from traveling merchants, and he's getting them secondhand in the taverns and marketplaces, and he's hearing all of these tall tales, which are what inspired him to go out and be an adventurer. Because he thinks that the wide world is extremely exciting. Probably more so than it actually is.
And I appreciate you mentioning that, because we're kind of glossing over the actual questions that I would be asking as we went through the machine, in favor of just telling you the kinds of topics that I would like to focus on. But when your player makes a decision, ask for more info. Make them develop that thought. Nurture it into a complete scene. Get as accurate a picture as you can of who that character is and what their situation is.
Yeah, when we were doing it, it really felt like you were twisting the knife for a little while, but it eventually wound up effective. You took my normal 3-hour character backstory situation and drilled it down to an hour, and I know that it would have been faster if you were dealing with a person who was more decisive. I imagine that when you did this with your other players, you got a trademark Steven level backstory in a fraction of the time.
This is one of those things that's fun for me, so I don't really care how long it takes, because I'm enjoying the process. But yes, everyone else was faster than you.
It was kind of like it was kind of like having a conversation with one of my kids, and every time I give an answer, it's like, why? You know, where are you from? This country. Town or city? Town. What kind of town? Small.
Moving on to the next thing.
Yes, let's.
As you continue to go through the machine, you will next hit the lifestyle. And this is pretty heavily informed by everything up to this point. For instance, we pretty much already had the answer for Salem. You're living in a frontier town, you have a small family, and your dad is grief-stricken, so you're providing all of the income for the family. You had a pretty meager lifestyle, and you aren't used to finery, and you're used to having to save up for things. In fact, you saved up for months just to buy your first set of armor.
Yep, yes, that's correct.
For lifestyle, we're looking for, is your character low class, middle class, upper class, or the 1%? Do they have social status? Do they have servants? Do they have to work for a living? And if so, what do they do?
Do they rent? Do they own a home? Do they own land? Do they have servants? Do they do everything for themselves? Are they a servant?
Yeah, and, with certain kinds of lifestyle come certain amounts of fame and infamy and notoriety. And as I said, the lifestyle question has probably already almost answered itself by the time you get here, but it's worth stating, especially since it's going to color how your character interacts with the world around them, and specifically, how they expect to be treated by other people.
Right. Their lifestyle is going to inform their relationship with money. Do they have a lot of it and they don't value it very highly, or do they have precious little and therefore value it higher than your common person? Are they going to be generous? Are they going to be stingy? And their position within society will inform how they interact with other people. If they're a noble, are they condescending? If so, that would probably be warranted. But if they were instead a gracious person, that would be significant because it might not necessarily be the norm. If, however, they grew up dirt poor as a beggar or urchin on the street, they would probably be extremely subservient to the common person because they're used to being kicked around a lot, or they would be fiercely independent because they refuse to live their life that way.
Nobody chooses option one. No.
Not for Dungeons and Dragons, probably not, because you're crafting the story of a hero. But when you understand their lifestyle, they are either going to look back upon it in the same frame of mind, or it is going to have changed and pulled a 180. So that sort of thing is significant. Are they a product of their upbringing, or are they the opposite of their upbringing?
Kind of like we were saying with the heritage.
And that will inform not only how they interact with the world around them, but how the world around them interacts with them.
Which is super useful for me to know, running a game for this character.
Right, because if you have a character from a noble family, and all of the common folk are used to just being tread under their feet, but you have a player character who is very kind and gracious with common folk, that's going to stand out. On the other hand, if you have a street urchin who is incredibly proud and fiercely independent and ambitious, they're going to stand out as well.
Up to this point, as we've been going through these 4 elements, the player has been in the driver's seat, and the dungeon master is just asking questions, and maybe offering a little bit of guidance, as you mentioned before, towards places in the setting or people in the setting that are going to be significant. If the player wants to be from a noble house and from a large metropolitan city, maybe you have an idea of what house that might be or what city that might be. Or if the player wants to be in a downtrodden environment and all of their family has died in some tragedy, maybe you know what tragedy could be applicable to that situation. Something that spurs them on towards the antagonist of your campaign. When the dungeon master is listening to the wants and desires, the hopes that the player has for their character, they should be listening ears open and pen in hand, ready to put in a little bit of work themselves to make sure that the player's desires are made manifest to the fullest extent of their potential.
As a DM, you really want to listen in so that you don't miss that one nugget that you can come back and use against them later.
But now that all of this is out of the way, and the player has had complete control over their destiny up until this point, it's time to throw a little dose of realism into the backstory. Because we, as people, certainly don't have complete control over our own backstories. All we can really do is control how we respond to the adversities that we face. So it's time to introduce a little bit of adversity, a little bit of chaos, with what I call the monkey wrench.
So this is an aspect of the character creation where you're basically saying, okay, this is your character, this is where they're from, this is the situation that they have found themselves in and how they've responded to it. Now I am going to take this monkey wrench and I'm going to present you with a situation that has happened in your past. How are you going to respond to it?
Yes, and the important part of the monkey wrench is that the character has no ability at this stage of the story to affect that fate. And that's probably not too difficult to do, because at this point they are a non-adventuring, non-heroic nobody with no class levels. But having the character feel helpless for an instant is kind of what we're going for here. Something has happened that they can either like or not like, but that they have no choice but to respond to.
For Salem, what was it?
So, for Salem, when we were going through your backstory, you had said that you had lost your older brother and your mother in some tragic accident.
Right.
And I caused you to question that particular event by telling you that a stranger that came into your little frontier town thought he recognized you, but mistook you for someone else who matches the description of your brother, causing you to doubt whether or not he died. And if he's still alive, what else that you assume isn't true?
That's right, I forgot it. That's how it came about. You told me that as part of the character creation process and asked me how I would respond to it. And I said, well, obviously, I'm going to ask that guy where he last saw this person, and I'm going to use the money that I have saved up to make sure that my family is taken care of, and then I'm going to use the rest to buy a horse and cart and head out for that town. And thus began Salem's quote-unquote adventuring career. He left home, he's now out on the road, and he has an objective in mind to find out what happened to his brother and whether or not he's still around.
And that is likely going to be the case for anyone facing the monkey wrench. Is this event is probably what is going to spur them on towards that adventuring life. This moment of helplessness is probably going to make them never want to feel helpless again, and they will go out to acquire the skills and comrades and items that they need to avoid being put in that situation again. Maybe they want to defy that fate, reverse that fate, or maybe just plain old avenge it.
So let's give another example then, other than Salem, which we've already discussed. Tell me about another character who you have put through the machine.
The very first person that I put through the machine was a character called Lila Trevina, and her player wanted her to be from a slum. She wanted to be a lower than lower class citizen, and she wanted to be from parents who were nobodies and have lots of siblings and lots of friends and street urchins growing up in the gutter. So we put her in a city that is in Estria, which we have talked about many times before on this podcast, where it is a magocracy. She was magically inept and poor, and therefore destitute. And she decided that her family unit was so impoverished that she and her little street urchin friends were going to try and improve their lives by going and stealing from the rich mages. Stealing from the Barrel Tower, the headquarters of the Arcane Research Collective.
Right, because let's face it, what did they have to lose?
Exactly. They infiltrated this school of magic successfully and were beginning to make their escape when we introduced the monkey wrench into the story. I said that while they were making their escape, they heard someone coming. They broke something, it made a noise, and the jig was up. And I asked her what she did, and she escaped and left one of her friends behind.
Her idea or yours?
Oh, well, she didn't mean to leave her friend behind, but by not ensuring her exit, the friend was accidentally abandoned. I gave her the choice. It was possible that she could have been taken. She could have been held responsible for the infiltration. And I had some ideas for how the story could go from there. But her decisions led her away to a distant country where she was free and wealthy from selling all of the items that she had stolen. And her character grew up wondering about her friend and what had happened and feeling guilty by that abandonment. And it shaped her character so delightfully. And hers was actually the first character arc that we explored in the campaign. And she got answers to those questions, and I don't know if you have put two and two together yet, but the Trevina family is still in Estria and has reclaimed quite a lot of power there in the current age of my campaign.
Yep, that name does sound familiar now that you mention it. Probably not to the listeners, but unless they are one of the people who's currently in this campaign with us, in which case, what?
A little indulgent of me, but I really like carrying through the stories of my old campaigns into the new for anyone that cares to play in multiple campaigns with me. But that is the whole of The Machine. That's the process that I go through with my players when we're hoping to create a new story together. It's quite open-ended, but there is a distinct process and only 5 steps, and it ensures that the dungeon master and the player are similarly invested in the character that comes out at the end.
For those of you who are looking for a more succinct and digestible version of The Machine, without all of these examples of characters in campaigns current or past that you can use yourself or show to prospective players who are going to be going through a campaign with you in the near future, Rob is actually creating a video on it, which he's going to be posting on YouTube under the Misty Mountain Gaming YouTube channel.
Yep, I'm learning how to edit video as well as podcasts now. Go check it out. Throw me a like. I'll appreciate it a lot. I thrive on encouragement.
Editing video is so much fun. Can't wait to see how it turns out. So you've been working on The Machine for some time now. When was it that you created it and put Lila through it? How long ago was that?
7 years.
7 years ago.
7 years for 4 points. It's been streamlined.
You know what's crazy to me is that in the much more recent past, a system with similar intent has been published by Wizards of the Coast, and there are actually a lot of parallels between The Machine and the Heroic Chronicle, which if you have not heard of the Heroic Chronicle, it is a character creation system that was first introduced in Matthew Mercer's Explorer's Guide to Wildmount. I had not heard of it until earlier this year because I don't own the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, but having now seen it and read it, I think it might be my preferred method of character creation, and I am extremely excited to implement this in the next game that I run.
Not better than mine.
You know, one of the things that I do like about it, though, is how similar it is to The Machine in a lot of ways.
Okay, I forgive you.
The difference is that it has a lot of rollable tables that provide additional inspiration and can actually be used to randomly generate a character. Now, the problem with the Heroic Chronicle, as opposed to The Machine, is that it is setting specific. So, about half of the content in the Heroic Chronicle is only going to be applicable if you are actually playing in that setting. Now, I will say that the co-author, James Hayek, did make a Sword Coast version, which he published for free on D&D Beyond because he is the lead writer for D&D Beyond, which you can find online. So there's now one for Matthew Mercer's campaign setting and one for the primary D&D campaign setting as well, but they would have to be doctored a little bit for any homebrew campaign settings.
I mean, that's kind of the delightful thing about rollable tables, is you can just trade out elements of the rollable table for ones that are appropriate for you. And frankly, my favorite thing about rollable tables is not rolling on them, but just reading down them and looking for inspiration and taking my favorite option.
Mine too.
But rolling obviously works too.
But I do like having a whole bunch of options that are pre-generated and they're ready to inspire for the choosing presented in front of you.
Especially if the Dungeon Master has filled in these tables themselves, because that implies that they are prepared for someone to select those things, and that they have ideas or stories ready, maybe.
Now, the crazy thing to me about the Heroic Chronicle is that you have never heard of it, much less interacted with it, prior to our discussion about this episode, correct?
Right. I have a complicated relationship with the Critical Role content for Dungeons & Dragons. I love the show, I love the people, and I have a lot of their swag in my house, but I don't own the Explorer's Guide to Wildemount, and I may never. I do have the Tal'Dorei campaign guide, and I think I've read, 50 pages of it.
So I see that as just your strong commitment to homebrew, because the part of this game that you enjoy most as a DM is making a setting and then making it important to the players. So I know that you own a bunch of different rulebooks, but I think you only own one pre-written adventure, namely Curse of Strahd.
That is actually factually correct. I keep seeing on D&D Beyond the magic items and monsters that Matt Mercer has created from his campaign setting books, and I have individually purchased some of those because I am so tantalized by new things, but I never intend to run in Tal'Dorei. So much of the book would be wasted on me, and money is precious. But since I don't know anything about the Heroic Chronicle, this gives us the rare scenario where you know something about D&D that I don't.
I know something you don't know.
Yeah, okay.
So at the beginning of the Heroic Chronicle, much like in The Machine, we are going to determine where you're from. And the first thing that you do is either choose or roll on a table that gives you the opportunity to select from the different countries and provinces within the world.
Okay.
Now, notably, these tables are weighted by population.
Interesting.
So the one that I have pulled up in front of me now is not the one from the Explorer's Guide to Wildemount. It is actually the one that James Hayek wrote for the Sword Coast. The one that is currently free on D&D Beyond for anyone who wants to pull it up and follow along. So because the Lord's Alliance makes up so much of the Sword Coast, you have a 50% chance of being from that region, whereas you only have a 5% chance of being from the Underdark.
So all of the Drow players out there, don't risk rolling.
No, well, you could be a Drow who is not from the Underdark, and maybe there's a lot of story potential there to figure out why aren't you still down there. But I didn't realize when I first looked this over that it was weighted, and once I noticed that, I thought, oh, this is very clever. Moving on from there, once you know where you're from, the next step is to decide what you were before you became an adventurer, which is the background, which has always been a part of the character sheet. But this gives you a 5% chance to be one of 20 different options. I say 20, there are actually 21 because it gives you an additional percent chance to be a Waterdavian noble. You have to roll a 100.
That's what you want,
but you
baby.
could be a Waterdavian noble.
I lied earlier. I do own 2 adventure D&D books, and the other one is Waterdeep Dragon Heist. I have bought that exclusively because I love Waterdeep, and I want to know as much as I can about it, and it is a great resource for that, and I'd love to be a Waterdavian noble.
Well then, don't leave it up to chance. Instead of rolling on this table, just take that as inspiration and choose it as your background, because as we previously established, rolling dice is not the only thing that D&D is about.
So, picking your homeland would kind of be comparable to picking your environment from The Machine. And the background would pretty much determine aspects of one's lifestyle. So far so good. We're kind of on the same wavelength, this Heroic Chronicle and I.
Yeah, we're running in the same lanes. Now, the next part of the Heroic Chronicle is social status.
Okay, more lifestyle-y stuff.
So, the social status is not a rollable table, contrary to what we've had up until this point. This is actually a cross-reference table.
Ooh.
You take your homeland and cross-reference it with your background, and then the point where they intersect gives you some relationships, some bonds, so to speak. So it will give you either an ally or a rival, or sometimes both.
So it's kind of like I was saying with The Machine. Answers to previous questions will inform answers to later questions. So as far as your social status and their relationships, that's determined by previous aspects. I really like that.
Yeah, the ally and rival as part of the character creation process is fairly novel to me, and it's one of the things that excites me most about this process. And we will come back to it because it is an important part of some of the subsequent steps, but not the next one. The next one is determining not just your country, but your hometown. So once again, we have rollable tables based on what country you're from to determine the city or town or hamlet of your origin. These are once again rollable tables, but you can make a selection. You will know where on the map you are, the name of your settlement, and the settlement's size on a sliding scale from hamlet to city to military outpost.
Okay, and I'm guessing, just for consistency's sake, that these tables are also weighted by population.
They are indeed.
Okay, makes sense. I'm tracking. This is a cool new thing I knew nothing about.
Yeah, it is. And this system, in case we haven't mentioned it before, is actually something that you are supposed to go through with the Dungeon Master before you finalize your character concept. This is something that you are supposed to go through before you pick your class and before you pick your race, because certain aspects of this, as we get deeper into it, may lead you in a certain direction or inspire you to change your mind from what you had previously intended.
I dig it.
Next up, you have a decision which is entirely within the player's purview, which is to choose your race. There is no table for this section, but based on your knowledge of the lands that you come from, you can choose to pick a particularly common race or a particularly uncommon race, and deal with the consequences of that decision. After race, we once again begin to parallel the machine, and it's time to
Hang
determine
on, you said it wrong.
So sorry. After that, we once again parallel the machine. And it's time to talk family. And the first thing when we're talking family is to determine the size of your family. And we have two different tables, one for if you come from a smaller village and one if you come from a larger city, and both are similarly weighted, once again, to certain outcomes. You have a sliding scale from 3 or more parents to 0, with 1 or 2 parents being significantly more likely. But once again, these are not necessarily things you have to roll for, these are things you can choose if you're so inclined. And then we have a higher number of possible siblings, which not only do you roll for the range, you also roll again to determine the actual number, ranging from 0 to 2d4 plus 2.
Ooh, that's a kobold clutch if I ever heard of one.
I'm glad that I didn't have to roll for kids in real life, because I just tested out the system, and based on the Heroic Chronicle, I would have 8 children.
Ah! Well, best not to leave such things to chance.
Very happy with the 3 I have currently. Unless I eventually have 8 and they listen to this podcast, in which case you were all planned.
And we love you equally.
And I love you all equally.
All right, so they're ripping off my system here, throwing in the family stuff. What else?
I think it's important to say that neither of you are ripping each other off, because you had yours in mind so long before this was printed, and you are only just now publishing yours. But they are running in very similar themes.
Great minds think alike.
True that.
Me and Matthew Mercer and James Hayek. 3 great minds. No one severely worse than the others.
So once you have determined how many people are in your family, it's time to roll 2 more times once again to determine how many powerful family relationships that you have. These are relationships with certain members of your family that are unique and life-changing, either for better or worse. First, you roll to determine how many of those you will have, and then you roll to see what kind they are. And there are some extremely positive and extremely negative ones on this sliding scale. If the dice don't work out this way, I would almost recommend that you pick a couple of each.
I don't have anything specifically to gear towards this. Now, we have uncovered, using my methods, some powerful family relationships, but I'm interested to get a little deeper into this one, because that sounds very exciting.
It is, and notably, these relationships will either classify these family members as more allies or more rivals, which is the next step in the process. As we begin to deal with allies and rivals, the first step is to go back to your background. Remember where we cross-referenced that table and we have an ally, rival, or both of indeterminate origin? It's time to terminate that origin. so to speak. So we have another table of relationships that one could have with an ally or rival, and there is some really juicy stuff in here. You almost can't go wrong rolling on these tables, but there is a lot of inspiration to be drawn from them as well. It has everything from an ally that fell in love with you, and then you get to decide whether or not that was reciprocated, or a rival who was ordered to arrest you and now doggedly pursues you wherever you go.
Valjean, at last we see each other plain.
That is a Les Mis reference that I don't understand. But now that we know how they feel about you, it's time to determine who they are. And the next table is to determine the identity of this person. It's a rollable table with everyone from commoners to gladiators, druids, cult fanatics, archmages, and adult gold dragons. It is one of the most interesting tables on the list, although once again, very heavily weighted. If you do opt to roll, hope you roll 90 or higher, because that's where all the good stuff is. And I say that not just because of the roleplay opportunities of having a adult gold dragon rival. It's because that if you roll a 93 or higher, you are guaranteed to have a fateful moment due to this relationship. And fateful moments are gold, like the dragon.
I'm assuming that this means something particular in the context of the Chronicle.
It is. Now, this is another area where it parallels the machine. Because a fateful moment is a pivotal encounter somewhere in your character's past. It has options such as your parents being murdered in front of you, to having been cursed with lycanthropy, to being the sole survivor of a rampaging monster attack. Pivotal moments that are defining to your character that are caused by some of these allies or rivals. Not necessarily directly, but because you have a relationship with a creature or being of that power, your life has been changed. And it has been changed in one of these significant ways. And these fateful moments all have a boon which they provide the character with. Sometimes it's the ability to cast a spell that they otherwise wouldn't be able to. Sometimes it gains you additional proficiencies or languages, or even magical items that you start the game with. So as a player, there is the benefit of making your character stronger and unique in a way that would otherwise be inaccessible to you, following the rules that's written in the guidebooks. And for the dungeon master, you get a story seed that is rife with potential.
Now, these fateful moments, you said you only get those when you roll a certain number on the previous table?
Yeah, there is a... math eludes me. It's between a 15 and 20% chance that you would get this if you rolled, which is why if I was to implement this system, I would guarantee each player at least one fateful moment. And if they ended up with more by virtue of rolling on the table, then great. But because they do impact the starting power of a player, and because they are so ripe with role-playing potential, I would make sure that no one was excluded in this regard.
Yeah, I'm not wild about that. I like the idea. I don't like the idea that not every player at the table has this opportunity, because it sounds like something that could be fun, and I don't want any of my players to miss out on something fun.
And one of the reasons this stood out to me is that, at least in the campaign that you're currently running, when you take a player through the machine, you did give all of the characters some sort of boon once it was over. Am I correct in saying that?
Yep. Everybody got a little good boy toy, a little reward for going through that process with me. It's my bribery to incentivize you to make a character as developed as I want you to make.
Like a reward for going through the more involved process.
Right.
And for going through it with you.
Yeah, and that's something that I'm looking at with this Heroic Chronicle is it really seems like a DM light process. I feel like the Dungeon Master could easily be replaced with these rollable tables. Granted, you could independently create a more involved character who is more innately and intrinsically bonded to the setting using the Chronicle, and that's good, but Tables don't replace a dungeon master to me.
I will say that it is true that a character could be generated using this system without the use of a dungeon master, although I think that that is true regardless of the system that you use. Like I said, some people just make characters for fun, and this system would provide them with some additional structure to use when doing so. However, the first thing that it mentions in the book to tell readers about what they are about to discover is: the Heroic Chronicle is a system that allows players and dungeon masters to work together to build a compelling character story. So it is obviously not the intent that you do it that way, though it could be circumvented. After the fateful moment, we get to the mysterious secret. Now, this is in the Explorer's Guide to Wildmount, but oddly enough not listed in the James Hayek version that's on D&D Beyond. I'm going to mention it anyway, though. This is some information that your character is privy to that they shouldn't be. And it could be just kind of this one-off situation, this thing that happened to you, or this thing you observed, or this thing that you read that may never come up. But once again, it's a little gift to the DMs out there that they could always bring back and make relevant to you at some undetermined point in the future. Things like, your character was the only witness to a cold-blooded murder, or you once saw an enormous figure walking through the clouds on the stormy night, and they locked eyes with you for a time, but kept walking. Or, a warrior friend of mine once died, but every so often, I swear I see that friend in their old armor, just outside the corner of my vision. I actually got chills reading that one.
Okay.
It may just be something odd about your character, or it may be inspiration for a story.
Yeah, these don't sound like secrets to me, but they do certainly sound mysterious, and they do make your character more unique, which I'm always a fan of. So, the fateful moment, the mysterious secret, those kind of sound like my monkey wrench. Something that's a little bit out of your control, something that might spur you on towards adventuring, or something that's an unanswered question about your life that needs a campaign to fully explore.
Like I said, that was one of the things that made this interesting to me, was the fact that you came up with a machine independently, and it's like you said, great minds must think alike. It was, both of them were written by experienced DMs who were trying to give their characters a lot of history, a lot of motivation, and a lot of story hooks. And finally, we come to the culmination of the Heroic Chronicle, which is the prophecy. Now, this step specifically needs the player and the dungeon master to work together to come up with 3 goals that the player has for their character. 2 of these should be short-term goals, and 1 of them should be a long-term goal. And the player is to tell the DM about not only the goal, but a potential result or complication once it is accomplished. And once again, we do have some ideas here listed on a table to hopefully maybe give you some inspiration and a direction to head. But the short-term goals are not intended to be the culmination of your story. They are steps that you want to see your character take along the way. And they're intended to have a positive outcome, but also a complication that's going to spur your character further forward.
Okay.
Now, the DM is not obliged to use your result exactly as written, but it should give them an idea of what the player wants to work towards, and maybe give them a little bit of inspiration for possible outcomes. You could run it exactly as the player is expecting you to, or you could subvert their expectations once the goal is achieved.
Okay. This I like, and I feel like this should be a natural progression of the machine, or of the Heroic Chronicle. I think that having gone through everything up to this point, you should pretty easily be able to identify what is next on your character's agenda, and maybe what they would like to be working towards, and maybe even what their culminating destiny might be. Having goals for the character is essential to role-playing them well, and I approve of any method that puts that in the forefront.
And I really like the fact that while the rest of this process is intended to be done with the player and the DM working in concert with one another, I really like the fact that this step specifically involves both participants.
Yeah, the dungeon master knowing what the player hopes for the character to get out of the campaign is beautiful. It's a roadmap. It's direction for your story. And whether or not they achieve those things or fail to achieve those things, that's drama, that's story, that's what we're going for.
As we previously discussed, that's exactly what keeps me coming back to the table. I like rolling mystical math rocks as much as the next person, but finding out more about the world and consequently about my character is what really makes the game exciting for me. And I think that's why I really enjoyed going through the machine to make Salem, who is probably my most, if not my most storied character, then certainly my most grounded character yet. And then it makes me really excited to try out the Heroic Chronicle when I start my next campaign.
Speaking of trying out the Heroic Chronicle, I think that maybe we should do that. And I think, in fact, we will. Not right now. This episode's getting kind of long, but maybe as some bonus content for devoted listeners.
Yeah, hey, that would be great, because I don't know when I'm starting this next campaign, and I was not actually looking forward to waiting that long.
I haven't decided whether I want to play on it either.
So yeah, let's go ahead and give this system a shot. You and I will both make some characters and go through the process step by step. That'll be a great way to increase your familiarity with it. We'll go through step by step, make some characters, and then we can even stat them out in a future episode. Go ahead and go through the whole process with listeners.
So, we're going to get right on to that. So, anything else we need to say about Backstories before we get started?
I don't have anything else to say, but I have so much more to ask. We've discussed a couple of different character creation methods. We've talked about the freeform characters that I've made in the past. We've talked about my current character that I've made using the machine, and we've talked about the system that I'm going to employ next, being the Heroic Chronicle. But I'm interested to hear from the listeners, to hear how they go about their character creation process. Do you start with a stat block, or do you start with a concept? What questions do you always ask yourself or your players when you're making your characters? Do you do it independently? Do you do it with other players? Do you do it with the DM? Or do you come into session 0 with a character sheet already filled out? And I'm especially curious to hear from other players who have gone through the machine in one of your prior campaigns to see how that process went for them, because currently I've only gone through it once. And I know that other people have come up with very different characters doing so. And I'm especially curious to hear if anyone has actually tried out the Heroic Chronicle and to see what sort of character they have generated using it.
If you would like to share any of your stories, opinions, ideas, or tactics with us in matters such as these,
I do like tactics.
Check out our Discord that we have made just for that purpose. The link is in the description of this episode. Or tweet us. We're on Twitter at Twinspiration.
I feel like not enough people ask this, but will you tell me about your character?
They used to have shirts that nerds would wear at conventions that say, "Don't tell me about your character."
I do know that, and I think that is a shame.
I want to get one of those shirts and cross out the "nt."
The don't, yeah. Please, tell me about your character.
Yeah, because I kind of want to know. But if our opinions and thoughts on matters such as these and other ones concerning the hobby interest you, go and check out Misty Mountain Gaming's YouTube channel. I'm working to fill that with similar content to the kind that you are aware of and are surprisingly coming back for here on Bardic Twinspiration.
Right, because that's a thing that exists now. Go check it out.
You will see my face. I have one.
Which means you have effectively seen my face as well, only slightly more handsome. I've decided that if we ever get together and do a video, I'm going to wear those glasses just so that everyone can constantly differentiate us.
Fair enough. All right, well, we have backstories to create, so until next episode, I'm Rob.
And I'm Steven, and thanks for coming back again. See you on the other side, as for a change, I take Rob through a character creation process. Wish him luck. See you there. The outro music you're listening to right now is called Mega Epic, and the intro music is called Super Epic. Both were composed by the wonderfully talented Alexander Nakarada and utilized under a Creative Commons license. You can find more of his music at serpentsoundstudios.com. If you enjoyed our content, please consider leaving us a 5-star rating and review on your listening app of choice. To keep up with us on social media, look us up on facebook.com/Bardic Twinspiration and on Twitter @BTwinspiration. Want to interact with us directly? Come join our Discord. After all, who are we if not people who are willing to roll the dice on making some new friends? Links in the description. Come check it out.
Welcome back, friends and adventurers, to another episode of Bardic Twinspiration, hosted, as always, without any sense of variety to break up the monotony, by myself, the D&D wannabe, Rob, the older twin, and the younger twin, who shall remain nameless.
That's right, I am back, as always, here ready to fill in the awkward silence gaps that would otherwise have Rob just talking to himself.
Now, Steve... I just said I was going to let you remain nameless, and I already screwed the pooch.
No, my secret identity!
The machine.
You're just going to get like some other audio to drop in there whenever you do that, isn't it?
You should see how I edited the YouTube video.
Can't wait.
I'm just trying to be consistent with that. A complete scene. Get an I did it twice. Get as accurate a picture as you can of who that character is and what their situation is.
And he's wandering the countryside as a vagrant.
He's a vagary. He's a beggar.
Is vagary actually a word? I didn't know if you'd made that up.
Vagary is a word. It does not mean wandering person. It means like a whim, a flight of fancy, a caprice.
Okay. I caught wind of him and found out that he's actually alive and wandering the countryside. Which I was going to say, we should make a Patreon soon. We're definitely to that point.
You can also say, we can actually say, go check out our Patreon. We already have the Patreon. Linked in the description, and then we can edit it out if we feel guilty later.
Is the Patreon set up?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
There's nothing on there, but people could give us money already if they wanted.
Yeah.
There's not like subscription tiers, but people could throw money at us.
All right. So you said release it as separate content, but discuss it now and compare it to the machine. Okay.